Okay, we are finally back on the Jaguar build. It has been way too long since I've done anything on this. If you remember from the last video, we did the front suspension and we got the sway bar in there. We got all the suspension parts and all of those are mounted and good to go. I want to continue on this front part, and so the next thing I want to do is the shock absorber and the steering and the brakes. And then maybe in the next video we'll actually start the wheels, which I'm thinking I'm going to try to make metal wheels with metal spokes. That might be a little ambitious, but we'll try it and see how it goes. As I've said with other things, it'll either work or it won't. But right now, what I want to start with is the shock absorbers. Now, the kit shock absorbers look like this, and I'm pretty sure there's a spring that's supposed to go in there. Now, when I look at images of the shock absorber, we actually see the same thing that we see when we look in the actual workshop manual here. So looking at the shock absorber, there's an outer covering or an outer sleeve that goes over the main shock absorber body. We can see the same thing over here where there's an outer sleeve that goes over the main shock absorber body. The kit wasn't like that. The kit, you just see the shaft. And well, I shouldn't say every, most reference photos I look at of the real car are like this, where you have the main body, then there's an outer sleeve that goes over top of that main body. So I'm gonna make it like this, and I think I'm just going to make it really simple. I'm just going to have some tubing, and I don't know if I have the right size tubing or not. That's actually not too bad right there. Now the kit parts, when you look at this thing, that diameter is skinnier than that diameter because it has to be able to remove from the mold. So this is actually a tapered piece, which is one reason why I don't want to use it. This tubing right here is pretty close to that smallest diameter. And one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to make this too big. So I think this tubing is what I'll use for the main body. And that, I mean, that works pretty well. Actually, that works even better. Let's see how these two work. Yeah, those telescope together pretty tight. I think what I'm going to do is I'll use those materials right there. That might be a little bit too loose. That's going to rock around too much. So I think I'm going to go with these right there, just like that. So I'll cut the pieces out of that, and then I'll have to make some end caps to mount onto the car body. I'll probably just turn those out of brass or aluminum or something and just kind of JB weld those into the tubes, and then find a spring to put in there, and that should be shock absorbers done. And then we'll move on to the steering, which we can kind of see right there. Now the steering, this is what the kit steering looks like, and I want it to look like this. So there's the steering rack, and of course the arm's coming out of the end. Yeah, this is a problem for later. So yeah, like I said, let me get some shock absorbers made and installed, and then we'll see how that looks. So give me a few minutes, I'll get right back with you. Okay, so again, this is the kit shock absorber, and here is one that I just got the parts done for. So basically, I took some aluminum rod, turned it down on the lathe, and just kind of with files, eyeballed a ball on the end, then put it in the mill to mill down a flat on each side and put a hole in it. And so then that will get epoxied right into there. And then I did the same thing for the other end, and that will get epoxied right in like this. And then we have the two pieces that go together like that. So I need to put a spring in there. I didn't have any springs that fit, so I ordered a couple of springs, or I ordered a couple of different types of springs from different sources. So hopefully, you know, in case one is too light or one is too heavy, hopefully I'll get a spring that that works. So the shock absorbers are on hold for now. And again, this is just the pieces right there. And again, those ends will just get JB welded into the tubes. And so, like I said, I'm waiting for springs. These will also get painted. I looked up some images of some shock absorbers for the car, and I found a bunch where the lower part was yellow and the top part was black. So I think I'm going to go with that. So we'll do yellow and black shock absorbers. I need to get the steering rack done, but I think before I do the steering rack, I'm going to work on the brakes, because I think it'd be easier to get the brakes mounted onto here while I can still move it this way. So I need to turn down a couple of brake discs, probably use steel. I don't think I have any cast iron of the right size to do that. So I'll just turn those down out of steel. And also I also need to make some brake calipers to mount onto the back side right here. So looking in the book, here is the front brake caliper. So I need to make 2 of those. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to get carried away with making all of the little parts and pieces there. I think what I'm going to do is find some other images online of a completed caliper. Of course, you can see the mounting lugs there. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do, since I have to make 2 of these and they're basically round, I think what I can do is get a chunk of aluminum in the lathe and basically turn a big round thing down and then cut out the 2 calipers. That's what I'm going to try anyways. Obviously don't know if that's going to work or not, but that's what I'm going to try. And we'll see if we can get that to work. And of course, turn down a brake disc. So first thing I need to do is find some material that's the right size and shape, and just start laying it out and see how it goes. Okay, so I was digging around in my pile of scrap metal, looking for something to make a brake out of, and I found these washers, 2 of them. And take a look at that. They are perfectly the right size. I mean, they're a little bit thick, which is fine, because I'll face off a little bit anyways. So I'll put those in the lathe, face off each surface, hit some sandpaper on it, so they have kind of the texture of a brake that has been braked on, I guess. So those will work out pretty well. Now, the brake calipers, there are no calipers for the kit. And the way the brake attaches to the kit is this just kind of goes in there like that. And I can't really do that on this one, because to put the caliper on it and then that on it and then put it on and bolt the caliper to here would be a little tricky, I think. So I'm going to try to do this the way the real car is actually put together. So on the real car, the brake disc is on a axle or a spindle. I don't know the correct terminology. A shaft, I guess, and then the wheel goes over that shaft. Get that back off of there. There we go. So this would be on a longer shaft than the wheel, which goes on the axle here, and then the wheel goes over top of that. So I'm going to turn that shaft down out of a piece of this brass right here. So this will become my brake assembly. And then for the calipers, I found this chunk of aluminum, and so what I can do is chuck that up into the lathe, and then I'm seeing a caliper here and a caliper here. So I'll turn that down to where it looks like a completely round caliper, and then I'll mill out all of this, and then I'll have 2 calipers. I think that'll work. Don't know why it wouldn't, but that's how I'm going to try to do it. And that way, both calipers should be exactly the same size. So anyways, let me get some parts done, and we'll come back and see if we can maybe get the brakes mounted on here and then start working on the steering rack. For the brakes, so there's one of those washers after I put it on the lathe, and just took a light face cut off and then put some sandpaper on it to kind of look like an area that the brakes have been on. There's the other side. And I turned down an axle for that to go on. That was just a chunk of brass turned down on a lathe, bored a hole for the shaft here, and machined a step for that washer to go onto. And then if you'll notice what I did on the lathe, I turned in like a channel or a groove right around there. And so then once I pressed that onto that step with some Loctite, I just took a center punch and went around there, and that just kind of swedged that brass out into the washer to just lock it in place. So that thing is pressed on, Loctited, and staked in place. Definitely overkill, but I did not want that washer popping off and then having a little brake disc back there flopping around. So there's no way that thing's coming off again. And so as you can see, this just goes on here like so, just like that. And then on the real car, that part actually goes on the bearings, and then that would be splined, and the wheel splines onto that. Obviously, I'm not going to cut the splines into there. And then the wheel will go over, well, not that way. The wheel will go over top of that, and then, of course, the center axle is threaded. So a screw and a washer will go on there to kind of lock that on. So that's what that's looking like so far. And I'm actually really pleased with that. I think that looks pretty good. So I just need to make one more of those pieces for here. And then I'll be able to put this back in the lathe and remove the two calipers from that chunk of aluminum. So let me get some more stuff done, and I'll come back to you and show you what all that looks like. Okay, so here's what the shock absorbers look like. And I got these springs in finally. And so the spring here, and so that's our shock absorbers. It feels like a pretty light tension. Hopefully it's right for that. I haven't put it on yet and tested it. But that should be okay, I think. I got more springs coming from another source, so maybe the new springs I get will be a heavier tension, or they might be lighter, I don't know. But I could always maybe put spacers under it, just to give more, maybe. I don't know. But anyways, I think these are looking and feeling pretty good. So yeah, and like I said before, I think I have decals to put on there. So anyways, we'll get back to those later. I got both brakes, discs, and spindles done here. And I started working on the caliper, and I started running into problems. So I took a bunch of measurements, made some drawings, and started machining down to blank, and realized that it was all wrong. So I cut that off and started over. Fortunately, I had enough material left, and so then I started on this one. I still, at this point, don't know if this is even going to work or not. But this will be the side that you see through the spokes. That will be the side. That will be, like that. But again, it's only a little section of this, because this one chunk is giving me both calipers. So if you can imagine, one caliper will be about here, and then I'll just cut the other caliper off from the opposite side. And this is going to be the inboard side, so this is the outboard side. This is the inboard side where it will mount to the suspension. So on the suspension part, this is the kit plastic piece. You have the two tabs over here with holes in them, and that's what the caliper bolts to. And so that surface here will become that surface. So on this side, again, if the caliper is coming out from here, there'll be one bolt hole here and one bolt hole here. And that relates to this inboard flange right down here and here. So the two mounting bolt holes will be there. And now while this was in the lathe, I went ahead and cut the channel or the groove that the brake disc actually rides in. And I did that with this tool. So if this in the lathe, this piece in the lathe, this came in and then machined all the way back that way. So you can see how far in that goes. And that created the channel for the disc. So once I cut the two calipers away from this blank, the disc should be able to just slide right in. Right now the plan is to put this on the mill, and I'm just going to mill off a flat right here. So I'll set it this way, and I'll just mill in a flat, and then I'll flip it over, and I'll mill in another flat right here. So that'll give me two flat surfaces to put into the vise to hold that secure. And I will measure and mark out where the piston would go. So the piston is a round section right there, and another one right there. Okay, so as I said, I milled a flat here and here so I could clamp it this way. And I milled down 3 millimeters, except for those center sections, and those will become the pistons, or the piston housings. And that leaves me about a 2 millimeter wide piece for the caliper. If you can see right down here, there's a flange right there. That's going to get the holes to mount it. So the next step is to make these round. And I'm going to do that with the boring head. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to set it over so it cuts a cylinder instead of cutting a hole. And I'll set it to a 6 millimeter. I decided on a 6 millimeter diameter piece here. And so this is just so I could figure out the DRO. I settled on a 6 millimeter. I don't have anything to base that off of other than that kind of looked right. Right now I'm thinking maybe I should have made it a little bit bigger. So let me make those round. Then we'll flip it over and try the other side. So I still, at this point, I still have no idea if this is going to work out or not. I won't really know until I cut the pieces out and have two individual pieces. But yeah, let me trade this out for the boring head and make those round, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, so here's that piece off of the milling machine, and so I bored down, or I bored around the pistons to make those round. I kind of messed up, I guess. They probably should have been out a little bit more, or a bigger diameter. When we take a look at the other side, where I kind of screwed up, and I don't know how well it's going to show because of the shininess of the machined surface here, but that part I think I should have just left long, like that surface there. I think I should have just left all the way to the edge instead of cutting it down, and then filing it to a taper back after the fact. I don't think I should have cut it completely flat off. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to make a separate piston and glue a separate piston on here later, and another piston will go on about here. Again, these get cut off about like that. But I think right now I'm actually ready to cut those free from the single piece. So I'm just going to take this over to the bandsaw and cut pretty much where I made the marker lines. Okay, so there they are, cut free from what it was. And I almost really screwed up. When I was cutting that angle, when I was cutting that bevel on the lathe, look how close I got to the recess for the brake to fit in. Yeah, if I'd have gone a little bit more, I would have had two separate pieces the wrong way. But you can kind of see here how that brake sets in. And again, this is oversized. I gotta take those edges down quite a bit, but that's how that's going to set in there like that. And of course, you got the mounting lugs there for when it goes on right there. Okay, so this was the one right off after I cut it from the with the bandsaw. And so I milled the ends. I first had it this way to mill across the top here, and then rotated it to mill across the top that way. So we have that little bit of a shape to it, which is what my reference drawings and photos look like. So this is an almost completed caliper. It is to the right size and shape. Like I said, I'm not happy with the way that came out. However, I think once it's all installed, it won't even be noticeable. I still need to do some work on the back. And I'm thinking the piston is too small. So I was just going to leave it because I don't think it'll be that noticeable. But I decided to try to make a bigger piston. So I made this on the lathe with a bigger piece of aluminum rod and then milled the edges down on the milling machine. So I think what I'm going to do is take that off. I'll put this in the milling machine, clamping it this way, and just face that off and then just JB weld that in place. And I think that's a more realistic size for a piston. Maybe it's too big, I don't know, but that one's definitely too small. So I'll shave that off and put that on. When this gets installed, if we take a look at the car, if we put the, that goes on like this, I still need to tap the holes here, but that goes on this way. So if we just kind of put the brake in place, and then that goes on just like that. So yeah, that's what that'll look like once it's all installed. So I'm going to have to bolt that together. See if I can get this in frame better. I'll have to bolt all that together before I install the steering rack so that I can actually get access to the bolts from the backside there, because once the steering rack is installed, it'll be a lot harder to get access to the bolts. So that's what that's looking like so far. Now, speaking of steering, I've been thinking about the steering, and when you look in the book, here's the steering rack, and you need the end of the steering rod to be able to pivot back and forth for steering and up and down for the suspension. The way they do it is with a little ball. So the end of that rod has a ball that just rests on the end of that pipe. Then they have this nut that goes over and holds it all together. So I figured that I would try to replicate that. So for an experiment, just trying things, I found I had a bunch of these aluminum threaded ball ends. I think these are used for RC stuff, RC helicopters and cars and stuff. So I took some brass tubing and I threaded the brass tubing so that I could screw one of those into it. And it's I think it's a 440 thread. But that brass tubing was almost the right diameter. I had to drill it a little bit and then thread it. You could actually see some marks for the tap coming through, which is fine because it's still screwed in nice and tight. So I threaded one of those balls in, and then I ground off the hex flats there. So that's what I ended up with, just like that. And this then can sit on the end of a tube here. So that's just a piece of brass tubing that I super glued on top of another piece of brass tubing. And you can see that gives me a recess for that ball to set in like this. And then to hold that on, I have a piece of aluminum tubing that the ball will fit in. And then I glued on the inside of that a piece of brass tubing that the ball cannot fit in. And all of that slips over just like that. And that holds that ball in place. And then this can go over top of that. And so that gives me that ball push-pull rod with that much free travel for pushing and pulling for the steering. Now, this was just a test to see if that would all work. I don't have any brass tubing the right diameter of the aluminum here. Right now, this is just super glued together. Those pieces are just super glued together, which I'll tell you, when you put super glue on a tube and you put another tube over top of it, that becomes extremely strong. Almost impossible to yank apart, to pull apart. So for what this is, super glue would more than likely be perfectly strong enough. However, I don't know as if I trust it long term. So what I need to do is I need to go buy some brass tubing of that diameter, and then I can solder that on, and then I can solder that little ring on the inside there. And so once I put it together, put that over here, that'll all get soldered together. And since the ball joint is aluminum, I don't have to worry about it accidentally soldering to the ball joint. But that will give me a ball socket for the steering, which is exactly the way the roll car works, except for that piece is a threaded nut and not a soldered on tube. But the way it works is the same. So I'm pretty excited. I figured that out, how to make that work. So that should be good. And of course, that end right there will attach to the steering arm right there. And this part of the rod will slide in and out of a slightly larger tubing that will make up the steering rack. So this will make up the actual rack. The rack itself, I'm not too concerned about because again, it's just a piece of tubing with some flat brass stock to make like a bracket that will then get bolted to the part of the car right back in there. So I'm not too concerned about that. That should be pretty straightforward. Right now, what I'm going to do is get this one to the same point of this one, and then replace the piston there, and then get those mounted to the car, and then I'll start working on the steering rack. And hopefully that won't make this video way too long. So let me get some work done. I'll get back to you here in just a second. So I've got the new piston calipers done. That's what they're looking like now. Got the new pistons on. I think those look a lot better. I've got a hole drilled on one side for the brake line, and I've got a hole drilled on the other side for a bleeder tube, and I'll put those on later. Now the back sides don't look as nice, as I've said before, because I really had a hard time getting the shape. But I put a piston on the back side, again, just to give me somewhere to put a brake line, and I need to drill the hole for the brake line. And since the shape was off, I'm fixing it with JB weld. Now that's after the JB weld has just set. So right now, we'll see if this is soft enough to trim this way. So just trimming that back like that, and then I'll have to go in with some sandpaper and smooth it up. So after sanding, you can see how much of that is JB weld. And yeah, I really got the shape messed up on the lathe. So I'm kind of annoyed that that much is JB weld and not aluminum. But once it's all painted black, it'll be fine. I mean, I was actually going to make this whole thing out of plastic anyways, so now it's only 5% plastic. So yeah, once that's all painted and put on, I think it'll look fine. There's what it looks like on a brake. And so I believe that, well, I got to drill the holes here first. So I need to drill a hole through the piston here for a brake line. Actually, two brake lines. Like I said, a bleeder goes here, another line goes from here, curves around up to here, then another brake line, the actual brake line goes into there. And then this can get bolted, well, then this can get painted. And I've looked at a lot of reference photos, and they're either black or gray or like an anodized yellowish goldish color. I think I'm just going to go with black, probably like a semi-gloss black. I think if I painted it gray or silver, it'd really get lost seeing it through the spokes, the gray silvery spokes and the silver wheel. And so, yeah, I think painting it black would give it more contrast to make it easier to see. But yeah, there's the brake done. And then down here, I've been working out the steering rack. I just have some thumbtacks holding some rod ends in place. I've got the overall length, and this will be the rack body. And then, of course, there's the little ball swivel here that I showed you earlier. And I'm just working out the length to make the other one. And this is going to be a little bit tricky because, you know, if it's too long or too short where the balls are, then the steering won't be enough. So yeah, I'm kind of taking my time making sure this gets laid out properly. So anyways, let me get the brakes done and painted and installed, and then we'll focus on the steering rack, and I'll show you what all that looks like here in just a bit. Okay, so the brakes are installed. There you can see a brake with the caliper installed, and of course we have the one on the other side. And I would be lying if I told you that was easy. I would say probably so far on this entire project, making and installing those calipers has been the most difficult thing I've done on this. You know, I took tons of very accurate, careful measurements. And when I followed the numbers on the digital readout on the lathe, I should have had at least 1 millimeter clearance around the brake and the caliper. And when I first put it on, it interfered and did not fit. I had to take it off and adjust it and put it on multiple times to get it to finally fit and have the brake be able to turn in there. Yeah, what a pain in the rear. So I've just got a piece of copper wire as the little crossover pipe there. I put a little nut on the end to simulate the threaded end part. And the bleeder port is actually a leftover spoke nipple from the Poker Mercedes wheels. And of course, it is screwed onto the lugs on the back side. And I've got the spot right there for the brake hose to connect. So I still need to connect the brake line that I've got curled up right there. So that's way too long right there. So I need to bring that brake line to a little bracket that'll come off of that stud in the back there. That'll be cut shorter. And then a rubber hose from that to there. And then the brakes will be completely done. And if it weren't for the fact that they can't, they would work exactly like a real brake. So I went ahead and moved on to the steering rack. Also, the shock absorbers right now are still off because the spring tension is a little bit light. I need to work on that spring tension some more. The steering rack. Looking at photos and in the manual, I have some reference material here. And I showed you this before, so I'm kind of basing everything off of reference, whatever I can find, this and photos. And this is what I've come up with. The main rack body itself is looking like this. And this is just a piece of tube, some brass sheet cut from this. I don't even know how thick that is. It just felt good enough. And bent, folded, soldered, and drilled to look like the reference material. That piece right there is just a chunk that I had on the lathe, and I filed a groove in it for the tube to set into, and then that got all soldered on, and then that got soldered on. I already showed you how I'm doing the pivots with the little ball and the piece soldered onto it. And just as a reminder, here's the other end I have not soldered yet. And it's an aluminum ball that got threaded into a brass pipe. Now on the other end, I threaded in a piece of, that was a 2.5mm bolt. I cut the head off, so that's threaded on. And I also drilled out and threaded the other rod end, so that screws on like that. So again, I've got this piece that I turned down on the lathe, so that fits in, but that bigger hole only drilled in part way through, so it cannot come all the way off. So that'll swivel like that. And then that little tube, that little piece of tube right there, I apologize for the nasty fingers. I'll explain that later. That little tube sits in there like so. That's not in all the way, but you get the idea. And then this goes in, and that all gets soldered together. And again, that creates a swivel push-pull joint just like that. So what I need to do now, oh, and also I match drilled the holes into the frame to there and to there, and I tapped them. And you might notice that those holes are right behind this rod here that's soldered on. So getting a drill in there was a little bit tricky. And the way I did that was I made my own long, skinny drill bits by supergluing a dental drill into a piece of brass tubing. Then I could put that in the Dremel tool, and I could come in out here and drill right in without touching any of the structure here. So I made my own long, skinny drill bits. So I've got that one to start the hole, and I've got this one, which is a little bit bigger, which is the right size for threading the hole. And to explain that, well, I had another drill bit, and I superglued that drill bit in, and I went to use it before the super glue was completely cured. So the drill bit shoved into the tube, and it was actually flush. There was like nothing sticking out. It was all the way into the tube. And to try to get it out, I grabbed a piece of steel wire, this piece of steel wire to be exact. And my idea was to put it into the tube like this and push it out. So I'm holding the tube like this, trying to push it out. So I started ramming it to try to shove it out. Well, in my effort, I pulled it out too far, and when I rammed back in, you see that little mark right there? Yeah, so it nicked that finger, and then it went into that finger right about there, came out of that finger right about there, and then into my thumb. So I now have 2 holes in that finger and 1 hole in my thumb. And I would be lying if I said it didn't hurt, like you know what. And so yeah, just a little pro tip. Don't do that because it hurts like a lot. So anyways, what I need to do now, I need to put this in here like that. It's a little bit tighter than it was yesterday. That's weird. So I need to sand that surface down. I need to see if I can sand out the inside of that tube. Probably got some junk dried up from the soldering. It's working out. It's freeing up. So that's moving pretty good. And I'm just noticing that getting those bolts in is going to be extremely difficult. It's easy enough when that tube is removed. But once that's in, those bolts are going to be a lot more difficult. So I could bolt that on and then put this in, but I would be afraid of when I solder that other end on, the heat might work over and mess up the paint or burn something on the model or something stupid like that. So I really don't want to do that. I'm just going to have to figure out, Yeah, that might be what I have to do. I don't see me. Yeah, I got to figure that out. But one other thing I want to talk about is you'll notice there's these rubber boots right there that cover up the ball joint. I have been stressing about that and thinking about that for the past couple of weeks on how I'm going to replicate that rubber boot. And I went online. The closest thing I could find were little rubber boots that cover the rudder push-pull rods on radio-controlled boats. But even those were too big in diameter. I found some that might have worked. They might have been okay, but they were $20 for a pack of 10. And if they didn't work, then I'd have wasted $20 on 10 things I'll never need anymore. And then I found in my own kitchen these straws. That right there is pretty much exactly what I need. It's pretty much the right diameter. Little bit big on that end, but I think a little piece of heat shrink will fix that. So obviously I'm not going to use green. I need to find black ones. I need to find black flexible straws. I'm pretty sure like Party Stores or Target will have black flexible drinking straws. Because that is almost perfect. It's closer than anything else I've found. I tried making one out of heat shrink. This is too rigid and it doesn't telescope in or out. So yeah, that's not really usable. So anyways, yeah, so I need to get some stuff painted and bolted and rubber jointed, and then I'll come back and show you what it all looks like when it's done. Okay, here's the steering rack all in place. Hopefully you can see it okay right in there. And I've got the shock absorbers temporarily installed. The screw that's in right there is not what's going to stay there. And I don't have a nut on the bottom here yet, because I might have to take those back out to adjust the spring tension. If we look at it now, they are pretty good. I think that's probably where I'm going to leave them. But not sure yet until after I get the card done and check the ride height. I could always take that apart and clip the springs a little bit shorter. But right now, I think that's pretty good for the shock absorbers. When we take a look at the steering, we could see the steering now does this. You'll notice I do not have the rubber boots on yet. And that joint right there is not soldered in yet. That can still come apart because I might need to take this all back apart again for the rubber boots, maybe. I mean, I shouldn't have to. I should just be able to take it apart here and unscrew that end and put the rubber boot on, but I want the option to take it apart now. And if I solder that on, that's going to make that pretty difficult. I also have the brake lines installed. I've got a little bracket there to hold the brake line with the flexible brake line coming into the brake unit here, obviously on both sides. And kind of hard to see, but I also have the drive shaft for the steering with a simulated U-joint right in there. I almost forgot that. I put the steering rack on, I had 2 bolts in, and realized I forgot the shaft for the steering arm. And by the way, the steering wheel is not going to drive the, this steering wheel here is not going to drive the steering. I thought about it, but I'm not going to do that. For one, I mean, I think it would be possible, but there was barely enough room to get that shaft in there as it is. And to have 2 little functional U-joints at each end would have been a nightmare, I think. I think the easiest part would have been putting a rack and pinion right in here. That would have been okay, maybe. But also connecting the steering wheel to that shaft in a way that would allow it to turn it and not slip or break, that I think might have been the most challenging part. And if you put play features like that in a model, then someone's going to play with it, and then someone's going to break it. Now you have a broken model. So by not having those connected, less stuff to break, and it's easier for me. But there is that front suspension done. Just a view from the other side here. But anyways, that is the suspension all completely done, except for the boots. I did yesterday after work. This is the next morning, by the way. Yesterday after work, I went shopping. I went to several places, Party Store, Target. Nobody has flexible bendy rubber or flexible bendy straws. So I came home and just ordered them on Amazon. And I'll have about 100 tries to make 2 of them work. But yeah, that part is done. The next thing I really want to get on, I mean, I do and I don't, but there's no avoiding it. I'm going to have to at some point, is the wheels. In the next video of this project, I will try to replicate these out of metal. And I have a few ideas on how I'm going to do that. Don't know if either of those ideas are actually what I am going to do or not, or if I'm going to come up with something completely different. But that's going to be the next video on this, is going to try to make some of these. And I know what Yoda says about trying, but yeah, I don't think Yoda's as smart as he thinks he is. I'm going to try to make metal wheels. It'll either work or it won't. So I am just so happy with this. I mean, I don't even think there's any bumps here. And as always, until next time, thanks for watching.